I just, again, I know it's just kind of a knee-jerk reaction, but my knee-jerk reaction was sort of the regulatory is going to absolutely drive focus, right? That's there's just no getting out of that. So, while I understand there's a desire to make improvements beyond that, I think, I get that regulatory may not be hitting us every year, right? But when it does, I think that's what's going to take precedent.
Yep.
And how long would it be if USCDI goes final in July, so a new draft comes out each January, goes final each July, when would that start to take effect in certification testing, for example? Is Matt Ron, are you still on the phone?
So, yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So it all depends on if it's included in the SVAP. So if it's included in SVAP approved standards for 2021, it will be at least 60 days before it's available to be included in the certification program. And
so that new release of C-CDA would attempt to get finished with the ballot, and then it would go into the SVAP, and then that's when ONC would be able to include it in regulations.
Yeah, so just to be clear, it's not included in regulation. Unless we come out with a new regulation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You just, we have the SVAP as an opportunity for vendors, if they choose, to move ahead of what is the floor, which is certification, right?
So it's a bit of a chicken or an egg thing, huh? Back to that earlier conversation that we had today. So if vendors say we're only doing what's required, maybe we have to say what other forces in the system can affect change. And I would say customers requesting improve, if it's up to the vendors and the vendors are waiting until ONC says, oh no, it's in the SVAP, you have the option of doing it, but you don't have to, then the only way that we can get to have to would be to drive it from what customers are demanding.
Hey, Lisa, I just want to make certain that nobody comes away from this thinking that I said we're only going to do what's required. That was not what I was trying to convey. What I was trying to convey is when there are regulatory requirements, that's where the focus will be, right? Mm-hmm. So in a given year, right, if you're turning out some scope of change in C-CDA and there's only a subset of that is tied to regulatory requirements, my prediction is vendors are going to focus on the regulatory requirements first, naturally, right?
Yeah, throw another plug out for the annual meeting next week, because on Monday at 12:30, 1:30, Al is giving another presentation on USCDI with our colleague Papia Paul in the certification division, and she's going to talk about standards version advancement process. So she's going to go in more depth on that SVAP, the SVAP process. I'm going to put the annual meeting in the chat. So if you haven't registered, please do.
Matt, your voice was trailing off. I think you said if you haven't registered for that, get registered. There's a link that shows you where to go to that meeting.
Yes, I did. Sorry, when I'm on computer audio, it tends to not work well unless I'm yelling at it.
Didi, will there be any pressures from the data usability group and the work that's happening within that Sequoia's convening? Anything that would be happening there that would help to become a pressure that would encourage or push for an annual improvement commitment? Dee Dee, you might be on mute or have stepped away. I'll save that question for when she gets back. I know a lot of implementers put comments in those STU questions that Brett was showing in JIRA, 300 or so things that people have taken the time to report as problems and issues. And I'm just wondering if that doesn't mean that there are some things that implementers wish were different. And if we did address some of those changes, that there would be an interest in rolling that out and not just waiting to see, oh, well, if it's, we want to focus in on what the regulatory environment is directing us that we need to do. But if we're responding to comments that are placed by implementers in the community, doesn't that necessarily mean there's a little bit of demand for those changes so that change can be made?
Lisa, I'm one of those implementers that will download the errata spreadsheet and go through, periodically, over time, quite frequently actually, go through the different C-CDA erratas. A lot of those are usually about cleanup of the implementation guide, you know what I mean? Provide clarification or, those kinds of things. There are some of them, and I wouldn't say a whole lot, that does actually cause us to do code changes. I think a lot of the changes we go through sometimes have to do with value sets. What the value set changes and things that when the IG changes something from a should to a shall, or end up relaxing something in order to be more flexible, to align with fire, for example, those kinds of things. Which are not a whole, at least in my experience, have not been a whole big, huge change, a whole lot. No, I shouldn't say big, huge change, because any code change is a huge change to us. I think C-CDA have been very good about maintaining backwards compatibility, which is what we've asked for as implementers. So unless ONC want us to do different use cases, maybe that would probably be a big shift. Do new document types and those kinds of things. That would probably cause more changes that implementers have to do.
Yeah, this is Matt. I kind of just want to chime in with Emma. I agree that C-CDA has been by and large good at avoiding backwards compatibility breaking changes. One area that I'd sort of love to see something similar in is value set changes. And I guess, Lisa, you're the person to talk to about that, is, when there's the annual value set update every year, I'm not aware of any way at a glance to see, what value sets have changed, and particularly what codes used to be valid but aren't now, or things like that. And that's where I expect, we'd see the most vocabulary errors.
Yeah, that's a good point. We should note that it has been our request from the National Library of Medicine that the tools that they give us to produce the new expansions would provide for a comparative view that would say this value set now has these 23 new codes, and it doesn't have these 5 codes, but they've been added as legacy so that you can still support documents that have been created in the past. It's largely set up that implementers need to do that comparative analysis for themselves. And even through this cycle, we don't have tools yet that can provide that kind of delta view for you guys to make it easier. So I think that that's a good note to take in terms of something that we might want to be able to follow up on and find funding to make sure that our tooling could get better, to give you a delta view on the value sets.
Absolutely. So I guess your advice to implementers right now is just kind of to go to VSAC on your own and download the newer value sets and try to diff them yourselves or whatever.
We'll produce a whole new package, so I'll show that briefly,
Yeah,
and then
I have
I
have a question on that, Lisa. So Matt, so
Okay.
like in the value set authority, they do list and they do provide like updated versions. So from the perspective of the ECQMs, and so they do provide a version differential system in there as well. Would the C-CDA ones follow through with the same sort of thing, or are you using the value set authority, Lisa, in that case?
We are using the value set authority, and it's interesting, thank you for mentioning that. I didn't know that they had a diffing tool that they use for CMS. We're following the same patterns that they use for clinical quality measures, and a few years back in 2016, we got started with this process, and now we have been every year since then updating this whole package. I'll show you the package that's available right now. It's a downloadable Excel sheet that has every value set that is used in consolidated CDA available as an Excel sheet. You can also get it in a downloadable XML format. And there's a little package that tells you what versions of the code systems were used in the expansions. And it's something like 100 and some odd different value sets that you have access to through this expansion package. And there's only a few that you don't have access to, which, because they're maybe posted in a different place, like for example, these little hover points here will give you a link to where you could go in FinVads, for example, to get a value set that NLM doesn't have a license to be able to provide in their system. Or there could just be, sorry, you're out of luck kind of situation, a few things, postal codes, language codes, country codes. Some of those value sets are just simply not available in VSAC, and we don't have another place to point you to. For those, you have to get them through other means. But each year when this comes out, we have a small amount of documentation that just basically says what's what about this package, and not a lot of detail about how, for example, let's look at, let's say the problem. Here's a big one, like encounter types, or the problem value set, which is a large intentionally defined value set that you could get a lot of new codes in, and some codes that are swapped out, where this used to be the code, now they're recommending using a different code for that problem. You have no idea how this problem value set changed from last year's version of it. And that kind of a diffing tool, I don't know if it would be a separate list or something like that, but I could look into whoever made the comment, maybe it was you, Jeff, about what CMS has available to them for diffing. If you could get with me and show that to me so that I could more effectively request NLM to do something similar for us, I think that might help break loose on it a little bit.
Yeah, that was me, Lisa. It was Dennis. So the diffing tool that they have is more, obviously most of the EHR vendors are going to know that, but every year when they do the MIPS reporting, so the ECQM measures often change. So they'll go from version like 4 to 5 or 7 to 8, 8 to 9. What they have is the diffing tool will diff all of the attributes associated with an ECQM measure and all the value sets related to it. It will tell you if there's a change, but if you want to see the actual coding change, you still have to click on version 7 and version 8 or version 1 or version 2. I think there is a comparison system built in there, but I'd have to go into a little bit more detail to show that. And then I think that will do what you want, Matt, but I'm not positive. But I use the value set authority quite a bit when we're updating for the quarter threes every year. for the new
Mhm.
standards and the new document IDs and the new measure IDs and stratifications and also to check if there's any changes between year to year, because sometimes they do make changes that you have to code for.
Right. And maybe there's a way so that downloaded Excel sheet when you get it. I keep this. This is one of the most useful things besides that tool that we just released on the web view. This value set Excel sheet is organized really nicely. It has filters on everything, so you can pick out a value set of interest, filter down to it. I just used that payer one as an example. And now you see all of the concepts that are included in this value set, exactly the code system that it came from. Here's all of your codes, your display, and the code system that it comes from, and the code system OID, and what version of the code system was used to make the expansion. So this is a very handy tool, but what it doesn't give you is a delta view from what this value set looked like last year. And I'd love it if there was another tab right in here that you could click on and see that difference. But yeah, if you can, Dennis, I'll take an action item to check that out, what they're doing for CMS, and see if we can learn how to ask for something better from NLM.
Yeah, I'll check into it. It may have changed recently.
Okay.
I haven't looked very recently, but I used to use that all the time for the differential to see. We also would load the value sets that are required, so we have the current year and the previous year loaded so that we can do an internal delta, obviously, of course, but I think they support it. I just haven't used it in a while, so I'll provide that information.
Super. I just put a link out in the chat too. Oops, it only went to Nancy. Let me send this out to everybody. This is the master grid homepage for Consolidated CDA right here, and you'll see all those 6 errata releases that we've done since August of 2015. This is an interesting page because while Consolidated CDA has been a little bit stagnant over that span of time, we have had the guidance of the companion guides that were released to respond to regulatory requirements, and there have been 5 supplemental IGs that are consistent with and in essence have expanded the volume of templates that are really a part of Consolidated CDA. So this is another place where implementers have opportunity and could be embracing change to take on new nutrition templates, pregnancy status templates, occupational data for health, infectious disease templates, and new versions of advanced directive templates. These are all interesting areas that some implementers may not know about, but another place where change and evolution could be happening on a more regular basis to be adopting and incorporating some of this additional guidance. We have one last aspect of change in the roadmap to talk about. I'm going to shift gears and change from talking about Consolidated CDA, which is one implementation guide built on CDA, and go back to talking about the core spec, Clinical Document Architecture. This is a spec that's been around since 2000 at HL7. Version 1 was an early release. In 2005, that was when when Clinical Document Architecture Release 2 became released as a normative specification. And it's what we've been building all of our IGs on since then, CDA R2. You may not be aware of it, but in 2019, a normative update was published for the base spec. And this document, this update specification, you can see if you go to the master grid and look up the Clinical Document Architecture, you see this CDA R21 sequence here up on the top of the pile. Here's CDA R2 that we use today for all of our current work. And you'll notice that this is published with the explanation that this is available for implementer review and consideration. And so we have a question, the CDA management group, for the larger CDA community that's working off from IGs built on this core spec, to find out what folks' intention is and planning is around the use of or potential use of CDA R2.1. As Linda explained, going through the HL7 re-envisioning process and HL7's commitment to CDA R2 and the IGs that have all been developed on that, and Brett showed you a roadmap for consolidated CDA that is developed off from advancing things based on this core specification of CDA R2. There's a question that hangs in the balance around what does the CDA management group see as the need in our roadmap for dealing with and addressing this update version of CDA. So we just want to use this opportunity to get a little bit of feedback from the community. So don't fall asleep. This is a chance. There's going to be another poll. We wanted to just, if you aren't familiar with this update to CDA yet, we just wanted to remind you this is a backwards compatible version of the CDA core spec. By that we mean wire backwards compatibility. It was designed taking into consideration that it needs to be easy to move between the two versions. The main focus was really building a lot of the extensions that are in CDA R2 into the CDA R2.1. So it incorporated a whole bunch of extensions that we have right now, and then it dealt with a couple other minor data type changes, some value sets that are, these are value sets within the core model, not the value sets in the templates, but value sets that, that drive the core model, some concept domain updates, and then a bunch of RIM class attributes. This is sort of affects the semantic richness of what we can say in entry relationships, for example, stuff like that. So we incorporated some new attributes in there. And support for tables within the narrative. And if anybody's ever bumped into that, I got to put a list inside a table. I can't put a table inside a table. We dealt with that problem. So these are some of the model changes that were in there, but it's largely just an update version of CDA. But there are no IGs that are developed against this, and currently in our roadmap, there isn't a consideration for how using or pushing the community to move or use CDA R2.1. It's not in our planning at all. And so this is a time when we really seek to understand if any implementers are even thinking about or considering this, because the management group needs to know whether we need to incorporate this in our roadmap, not incorporate it, where do we stand, and we'll be discussing this at the May working group based on the feedback that we're hearing from the implementer community. So Jean, can you put up this poll? We have just one very brief question for folks who are out there. I can probably guess what you guys are thinking just based on how you're talking about consolidated CDA already, but I don't want to second guess. We want this to be your opportunity as implementers to give feedback that HL7 will be able to use to think about their roadmap. Based on what your organization knows today about the clinical document architecture roadmap and what's new in the CDA R2.1 base spec, is your organization planning to implement anything with respect to CDA R2.1? Are you not planning to implement it, or do you need more information to really make an informed decision about this? So far, I have 8 people who've weighed in on that, and we're just trying to, kind of get a temperature check as to how the implementer community is thinking about and feeling about possible lower level changes that would happen at the core spec level. Give you another couple minutes. We're up to just over 10. Anybody else want to weigh in on the poll?
So this is Emma. I think one part that you missed out, well, not missed out, but that we looked at it, but we implemented it more from a receiver side. So for our input code, for example, if something in CDA R2 was extended, for example, like if it used to be 0.1, for example, and now they changed it into 0.1 we changed our input code to accept multiples in case we receive something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So on our, we
Um,
did do some modifications for C-CDA R21 for input purposes.
Interesting. And is that because you were seeing documents come to you that were already in CDA R21, or you just felt like that was an appropriate
We
choice
felt
to make?
it was safer to do that because we
Mhm.
wanted to be more proactive,
Mhm.
rather than start getting feedback from clients or customers saying they're dropping data, they're unable to import something or something like that.
Mhm.
And and then also didn't want to get caught up in it's a patient safety issue, kind of situation. So we're just trying to be more
Right.
proactive.
We're definitely
Right. Oh,
seeing we're definitely seeing 2.1s. That doesn't mean they're all there. They're certainly not all 2.1s, but we're definitely seeing some of them, as I mentioned in my slides, the encompassing encounter information helping.
now, are you talking about consolidated CDA 2.1 or the base CDA 2.1? So confusing because their letters are so close together.
Those are awfully similar. I'm not sure. Now I'll have to go back and double check.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I think that, Nance, from our perspective, we've only seen the C-CDA 2.1, but I absolutely agree.
Right.
A lot of transition there for it. The CDA underpinning, I haven't seen anything that I know of, but it's not like I'm scanning for them. But it would be interesting with the schema consolidation between some of the extensions and whatnot to see where that heads over time.
Yeah. I know Epic, for our part, hasn't really done anything with CDA 2.1 yet. One thing that would definitely kind of encourage us to move in that direction is right now, because C-CDA is so tethered to CDA 2.0 and there's no real way to send a C-CDA document using CDA 2.1. I feel like we're kind of stuck in a CDA 2.0 space, but if there ever were a way to send a C-CDA document using CDA 2.1, then that would open up a lot of possibilities for us.
Okay.
And I would imagine that Dynamic would do that as well, definitely on consumption. But as far as creation, if our clients get into a bond and they have data that they're capturing for EHI for export, we're going to use any specification available to help them get the data out of the EHR in a standard format.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all the feedback, and I think we're going to have a poll up. Maybe I'll work on the shape of that question to separate the notion of are you planning on supporting it versus planning on creating documents with it, and we will get that posted in the Zulip chat area so that the community can continue to weigh in. It sounds like there's some definite, like the narrative that you guys provided was probably more helpful than just the poll responses, and maybe we can get a little conversation going out on Zulip chat between now and the May working group, where we're going to try and make some decisions about using our energy for the aggressive timelines and the advancements that Brett went through, and what does that mean staying on CDA 2.0 versus trying to incorporate and underpinning a change to the base spec at the same time. We're just not sure how much change we can really absorb and what's worth it or not worth it. All right, with that, Jean, I'm going to turn it back to you and Joginder for end of day wrap-up session.